Protesters take to the streets in Elizabeth City tonight after a deputy shot and killed a man while trying to serve a warrant. It also prompted a special city council meeting seeking answers. Details are just ahead. There is concern, anger, and emotions are running high tonight in Elizabeth City following a fatal deputy-involved shooting this morning. Protesters took to the streets tonight demanding answers after a deputy with the Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office shot and killed Andrew Brown Jr. in what started out as an effort to serve him a search warrant at 421 Perry Street. Family members and close friends of Brown spent all day and now night seeking answers. The investigation is now being led by the State Bureau of Investigation. However, some people went to City Hall as the council held an emergency meeting. Cindy Choi was also there tonight.
Outside of City Hall in Elizabeth City, more than 24 people gathered, some of them family members and close friends of Andrew Brown Jr., who was shot and killed by Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office deputy Wednesday morning. Several times the crowd yelled for a man who was shot and killed by a deputy in Elizabeth City. Andrew Brown Jr.'s cousin, Richard, is holding his son tight as he listens to the cries demanding justice.
Raising two boys, like, you shouldn't have to teach your boys how to deal with stuff like this at a young age. And for the police to just do stuff like this, man, it's unfair. It's unfair to us as a people. It ain't just black people. It's a people. Like, we're a community. We're a city. Somebody got to be held accountable.
The Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office was conducting a search warrant when it turned deadly. The state is now investigating the shooting.
What we are looking for at this time will be accurate answers and not fast answers.
Among the answers City Councilman Darius Horton seeks is the body camera the deputy wore at the time.
I'm hurt. I'm hurt. Our community is hurt. Our community is torn apart. Nobody wants to hear what anybody has to say. They just want answers. So I'm just hoping that the video footage for me, that video footage will speak volumes. That's what I'm looking for. I want to see what happened. Because there's no way, there's no reason, in my personal opinion, that a warrant should end up in a man being dead.
Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office says they will be transparent and take actions based on what the state finds in their investigation. The deputy is on administrative leave. Reporting in Elizabeth City, Cindy Choi, WITN News.
Sheriff Tommy Wooten said the body camera was active at the time of the shooting. However, they did not say when that video will be released. Womble said the State Bureau of Investigation will be thorough and there will be no rush to judgment.
We've got live coverage from Elizabeth City as night number 11 of protesting the death of Andrew Brown Jr. rolls on. Many still calling for the release of that body cam footage. 11 straight days of protesting in Elizabeth City over the killing of Andrew Brown Jr. Protesters continuing their message to release that body cam video and hold the officers involved accountable. Our Liam Collins has been there all day long. So, Liam, what's the latest?
Tyler, the city's curfew is just less than an hour away on another night of what has been very peaceful protests and nonviolent protests so far, but tensions ran high with law enforcement for just a moment as they expressed some frustration of only 20 seconds of police body cam footage released of the shooting of Andrew Brown Jr. And as they wore riot gear, some protesters say that just sent simply the wrong message. Protesters are not letting up in Elizabeth City over little questions answered in the death of Andrew Brown Jr. Angela and Harold Tolbert came from Maryland.
We have 2 African-American sons, so every time they go out, we hope he doesn't find himself or themselves in that predicament.
It's been a very peaceful protest, and so therefore, it was in line with the Constitution of the United States of America.
Reverend Curtis Gatewood and Adonis Jones were arrested Tuesday on disorderly conduct charges and for violating the city's curfew, then 8 p.m., but now pushed back until midnight.
It's not just about swapping out a few bad eggs and putting a few good ones in. We need to change the whole system.
Out of the 7 deputies involved in the shooting, 4 were put back on active duty.
When one of us is locked up for a crime and we're together, all of us are charged with that crime as an accessory to whatever degree it was.
Their calls for better accountability from the sheriff's office continue tonight. At one point, they stopped for an emotional moment in front of Andrew Brown Jr.'s family home, where they said they would walk with them the whole way. Protesters blocked off entire sections of streets in nonviolent protests, but the tension in the air is high on the 11th night for protesters say not the last one until the full story of Brown's final moments is told.
If the camera the footage shows that the cop was in the wrong, then someone needs to come out and say that.
Pasquotank County Sheriff Tommy WITN says that he does support the release of that body camera footage as soon as legally possible, as long as it doesn't interfere with the investigation into the incident, and maybe weeks until the public gets to see that footage. But protesters say they will continue to take to the streets until they do. Live in Elizabeth City tonight, Liam Collins, WITN News.
Friends and family got to pay their respects to Andrew Brown Jr. earlier today during a private visitation. The public then got a chance to do the same in Elizabeth City. But protesters and community leaders say there are many questions left unanswered in his death. Liam Collins was at a series of demonstrations and memorials and is live now where Brown's viewing has just wrapped up.
Ahead of that viewing, a 12th straight day of protesters taking to the streets to demand better accountability a week and a half after Andrew Brown Jr.'s death, and to find out exactly what happened in his final moments. His family led marches today during a visitation for Brown open to the public. The first time those marching through the streets on his behalf were able to honor him in person, and had a touching moment of their own at the home where Brown died and where a mural now stands in his honor. There, his aunt Lily Brown Clark thanked protesters for honoring Brown's memory and the movement in the city it created.
It cannot be said that Elizabeth City shows any disrespect for this cause, because you have not. You have blessed us, you have blessed this family, and you have stayed the course all week. And I have to commend you, thank you, praise you. And I thank God for you. You have been relentless.
Andrew Brown Jr.'s youngest daughter led the chants for a stretch of the march today, yelling out for justice for her father alongside the rest of her family. It was quite a raw moment to see the extent of their family's pain. Reverend Al Sharpton will deliver Andrew Brown Jr.'s eulogy at his funeral. That's scheduled for tomorrow at noon at Fountain of Life Church here in Elizabeth City. The family has requested that that funeral be kept as invite-only, Dave. Live in Elizabeth City tonight, Liam Collins, WITN News.
All right, thanks, Liam. And those who wanted to pay their respects to Andrew Brown Jr. or his family were welcome to a public viewing at the Museum of the Albemarle. His body was at the auditorium where several people came to show their support after 2 weeks of protests and demanding justice in his shooting death. Councilman Gabriel Atkins says the community is still hurting, and this weekend is about supporting Brown's loved ones.
This is about Andrew Brown. It's about getting justice for Andrew Brown. That is why we're here. That is why all of this is going on. We're here in the community. Our city has never seen anything like this before. And, you know, we just want justice. We want justice for Andrew Brown. We want justice for his family, his children, and for our city so we can come back together again as a community.
Atkins said it was hard to process everything that's happened so far when he was viewing Brown's body. He says he'll continue to fight for justice and for his family and his children.
Right now on WITN News at 5, a man shot and killed by Pasquotank County deputies has been laid to rest. We take you inside his funeral as protesters continue to demand answers for his death. Today, family and friends of Andrew Brown Jr. gathered for a private ceremony to say goodbye. His funeral comes nearly 2 weeks after he was shot and killed by Pasquotank County deputies while they tried to serve him a warrant. Few details are still known about what exactly happened that led to shots being fired, leading to continued protests and unrest in Elizabeth City. Tonight, we have live team coverage of Brown's funeral and the continued unrest. Amber Lake will join us in just a moment as protesters begin to gather for another night of demonstrations. First, Nikki Hauser joins us live to explain how family and friends said goodbye to Brown this afternoon. Nikki.
Hey, Stacia, about 600 people gathered here at Fountain of Life Church in Elizabeth City to pay tribute to Brown. So just hours ago, they were laughing, crying, and praying for Brown. Now I want to show you a moment here. This is the moment that Andrew Brown's casket was wheeled into that church, followed by his family and other loved ones. Now, after Brown was shot and killed by county deputies about 2 weeks ago, they remember him as a father, cousin, friend, and someone taken too soon. Now, Reverend Al Sharpton gave the eulogy here, and Reverend William Barber, Brown's family, attorneys, and family members of George Floyd and Eric Garner, they all shared words at this funeral. And his sons tearfully called for this to never happen again.
It's a terrible way we had to be together like this, but, you know, seeing everybody, I'm glad we're together like this right now. He would have loved this. He's not here, but he's here, though. Amen. He's definitely here. His physical being ain't here, but he's here with us, for sure.
We are going to celebrate him, but we are not going to excuse the fact that we shouldn't have to be here to do this.
Between prayers and condolences, Sharpton also called for the release of the body camera videos from Brown's shooting. And Stacia, that was a big theme in his funeral, remembering Brown and who he was, but also calling for justice. Reporting live in Elizabeth City, I'm Nikki Hauser, WITN News.
All right, thank you, Nikki. Our team coverage continues now with Amber Lake. She's keeping an eye on the ongoing protests in Elizabeth City. Amber, what are you seeing out there now?
Well, Stacia, I'm in this parking lot in between the public safety building and the library right here on Colonial Avenue. Now, this is where protesters have been gathering before they start their march. But as you can see, it's fairly quiet right now. Now, Andrew Brown Jr.'s funeral did just end a little while ago, about 10 minutes from this spot. And protesters for the past few days have been coming out right here and staying here throughout the evening. And they said this is how protests will continue to look from now on. Now, the curfew is still in effect this evening here in Elizabeth City, and it goes into effect at midnight, and it'll last until 6 a.m. And we're a little unsure about how long these protests are going to last. I did speak with a councilman, Gabriel Adkins, last week, who told me that they have no plans on stopping these protests from now until, you know, justice is served, they said. And coming up at 6, I'll have another live look out here to see where we're at with the protests and see if any protests have started in this area. Live here in Elizabeth City, Amber Lake, WITN News.
Police threats made tonight. Live protests for several hours on Spinless Wednesday, with protesters taking to the streets and hitting businesses in their pockets with an economic boycott.
High emotions tonight in Elizabeth City as protesters demonstrate in the streets. Going on 4 weeks now since Pasquotank County deputies shot and killed Andrew Brown Jr. while attempting an arrest.
Several arrests tonight, and today the protest took another turn, adding an economic boycott called Spinless Wednesdays. Organizers say do not spend money in Pasquotank County on Wednesdays. Today, Andrew Brown Jr. was killed. Amber Lake in Elizabeth City tonight. She's shown us much of protest live tonight on our WITN Facebook page. Amber, recap tonight for us.
Well, Dave and Sharon, tensions are very high tonight after several protesters were arrested in a span of about 2.5 hours right here in downtown Elizabeth City. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to show you this video of the very first arrest that happened earlier this evening. This gentleman stood on top of a police car and ended up getting arrested on Water Street and charged with injury to personal property and assault on a government official. At least 7 other arrests happened tonight, and they were made as the night went on, one of which told me he was charged with failure to disperse on command. 2 of those arrested tonight had press vests and badges on and told me that they work for USA Today, but those 2 media personnel were not charged with anything, they told me. At one point, though, officers were chasing protesters who started to run away. Now, Elizabeth City Police did announce a warning to protesters multiple times starting around 8:27, telling them to stop blocking the roadway and that this was an unlawful assembly. The final warning was made around 8:45, and then arrests started being made. We are unsure if anyone, protesters or officials, were injured during the arrest. Now, there's still a small group of protesters that have been standing right outside the police department waiting for everyone who's been arrested tonight to come out of the police department, and I'm pretty sure that was what that noise was that you just heard. I'm pretty sure the last person who was arrested has made their way out of the police department, and protesters are welcoming them back into their group, and I'm thinking that a lot of them are going to start going home now. Live here in Elizabeth City, Amber Lake, WITN News.
A month after Andrew Brown Jr. was shot and killed by Pasquotank County deputies, and just days after the decision to not file charges, civil rights leaders pushed for further investigations.
It's been 1 month since the shooting death of Andrew Brown Jr. by Pasquotank County Sheriff's deputies, and protesters aren't stopping their calls for justice.
Earlier today, civil rights leaders announced their plan to get federal officials involved and continue investigating. Around 60 people marched the streets in Elizabeth City today, including those who have been previously arrested at those demonstrations. Officers continue to follow and lead protesters through the march, which lasted about 3 hours tonight. The This afternoon, the NAACP and repairers of the breach announced a letter going to the U.S. Department of Justice calling